Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I build maps of places nobody can visit. That's the core of it. I'm a bathymetric analyst. I take raw sonar data from deep-sea survey vessels and I process it into precise three-dimensional models of the ocean floor. The technology works like this. A multi-beam sonar system mounted to the hull of a survey ship sends out fans of sound pulses toward the seafloor, measures how long each pulse takes to bounce back, and from that timing, data produces depth measurements accurate to within a few feet, even at extreme depths. A good survey run over complex terrain produces millions of individual soundings. I assemble those soundings into maps detailed enough to show individual geological features, ridges and scarps, and the particular topography of places that have never been seen by anything with eyes. My name is Caine. I'm 43 years old, and I've been doing this for 16 years for a private oceanographic survey company out of Seattle. I've mapped ridges, seamounts, hydrothermal vent fields, cold seep communities, and trenches. I know what the deep ocean floor looks like in the way a cartographer knows a city they've mapped 100 times. I know what geological processes do to seafloor terrain and how they do it and at what rate. 16 years of this work builds a specific kind of knowledge, the kind that lives in pattern recognition, in the instant read of a depth profile that tells you what made it. Nothing about the seafloor surprises me. I need to say that before I say anything else. 9 years ago, my company was contracted by a geothermal research consortium to conduct recurring bathymetric surveys of a subduction trench in the Western Pacific. I've been the analyst on this project since the first survey. I've run the data from 4 separate expeditions over those 9 years, and I know that trench, the way, a place you've returned to enough times that you can feel when something is different before you can say what it is. Something is different. I've been sitting with how to say the rest of it for about 4 months, and I'm going to say it the way I say everything, which is precisely and in order, because that's the only way I know how. The 4th survey data came in 14 months ago. My standard process when new data arrives from a recurring survey site is to layer it over the previous survey's map and run a comparison. Changes between surveys are expected. Sediment shifts, minor wall slumping, the slow geological drift of active subduction zones. I look for changes as part of quality control to make sure the new data is clean and to flag anything significant for the project geologists. I loaded the comparison and started working through it from the shallower sections toward the deep end of the trench. The deep section stopped me. The trench floor in a specific area, a region I'd been mapping since the first survey 9 years ago, was deeper than it had been in the 3rd survey, not by a few feet, which I'd attribute to measurement variation between survey runs, by several hundred feet in a defined area, not uniformly across the trench floor, but in a pattern, a central zone of significant deepening surrounded by a ring of lesser deepening that faded at the outer edges back to depths consistent with the previous survey. I ran my data quality checks. The sonar system was the same model as previous runs, calibrated correctly, operating in good sea conditions. The data was clean. The depth change was real. I pulled up the third survey and compared, then the second, then the first. The deepening wasn't new to the fourth survey. It had been happening across all of them. The trench floor in this area was shallower in the first survey than the second, shallower in the second than the third. Each survey had found it deeper than the last, and I hadn't caught it before because the change between any two consecutive surveys was small enough to sit within my acceptable quality thresholds. Laid across all four surveys together, the cumulative change was not within any threshold I could apply. The trench had been getting deeper with every survey run for 9 years. I sat with that for a while before I did anything else. I spent several days building the most precise model I could of the deepening's distribution. Not just how much deeper, but where exactly and in what shape. Geological deepening in a subduction trench has a character to it. It follows structural lines, fault traces, and plate boundaries. It has the irregular quality of enormous forces acting on heterogeneous rock, varied and unpredictable in its specifics, because rock is varied and the forces acting on it change across the terrain. I've mapped enough of it to know what it looks like. What I was looking at didn't look like that. The deepening was centered. It radiated outward from a single point on the trench floor in a pattern with too much regularity to be accidental. The deepest material was directly at the center. Moving outward from that point, the depth decreased in increments that I measured carefully across the model. The increments were consistent, not identical, but close enough that the variation fell within the precision limits of my sonar system rather than outside them, meaning the variation might be measurement limitation, not actual irregularity in the pattern. I looked at it for a long time. I pulled up every geological reference I had for this area: fault traces, seismic records, sediment core data from earlier research expeditions. There was no structural feature at the center of the pattern. No fault, no vent field. Nothing that would explain why that specific point on the trench floor would be the origin of progressive deepening. Then I looked for the debris. When rock is removed from a location, it goes somewhere. Trench wall slumping produces debris fields on the lower slopes. Erosion produces sediment plumes. The volume of material missing from 9 years of deepening was considerable, and rock doesn't simply cease to exist. I mapped the sediment distribution across the full survey area, looking for where it had gone. There was no debris field, no unusual sediment accumulation anywhere in the data. The rock that had been there across the previous surveys was absent from the new one, and there was no record in the data of where it had gone. I sat with that for a long time, and I let myself look directly at what the map was telling me. The pattern of the deepening looked like an excavation, something working outward from a central point in regular expanding passes, removing a consistent volume of material with each pass, stopping at a defined boundary, and then, in the next survey period, starting again from where it had stopped and working outward further. I didn't say that out loud. I wrote it in my private notes and then looked at what I'd written, and then I went and made coffee and came back and looked at it again. I didn't delete it. I calculated the volume of material removed across all 4 surveys. Hard basaltic ocean crust, not the soft surface sediment, but the dense underlying rock of the deep ocean floor. Hundreds of millions of cubic feet of it, removed without debris, without displacement. without any physical evidence in the data that it had ever been present. I sent the comparative depth maps from all 4 surveys to a geologist I trusted, a woman named Dr. Faye Obi, who specialized in deep ocean geology and who I'd consulted on data questions before. I didn't tell her what I thought was happening. I asked her to identify any geological mechanism that could account for the observed changes. She got back to me in 3 days. She said she couldn't. The deepening pattern wasn't consistent with subduction processes, hydrothermal activity, fault movement, or any other mechanism she could identify. She said the absence of debris and sediment displacement for the missing volume was the element she found hardest to work around. She asked what I thought was causing it. I told her I was still working on it. I wasn't ready to describe the shape of the excavation to another person, not yet. I went back to the data and I measured the rate of deepening across the 4 surveys, first survey to second, second to third, third to fourth. The rate was increasing. Whatever was removing the material was removing more of it in each survey period than it had removed in the period before. The acceleration wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent, and it was in one direction, and the trend line was clear. It was working faster than it used to. I requested the raw unprocessed sonar files from all 4 survey expeditions, the data before my processing touched it, and I went back through the returns from the deepest part of the excavation, looking at signal quality directly. The first 3 surveys showed normal returns from the deep area, strong, clean signals reflecting off hard rock at the expected timing for the measured depth. Solid bottom, solid returns. The 4th survey was different. The returns from the very center of the excavation, the deepest point, were attenuated and delayed in a specific way. The sonar pulse was going down, and the return was partial. Some of the signal came back, some of it didn't. The portion that didn't come back had been absorbed by whatever was at the bottom of the excavation, rather than reflected from it. I processed the partial return data and produced a depth estimate for the central point. It was deeper than the surrounding area by a significant margin, deeper than the overall deepening trend would predict, as if the excavation at that specific location had gone further than everywhere else, gone down further into whatever was below. I modeled what the return characteristics suggested about what was at the bottom of the deepest point. The characteristics were consistent with an open space, not rock, a void, or something that behaved acoustically, like a void, as if the excavation at its center had broken through into something, and whatever it had broken through into was large enough that the sonar signal entering it didn't find a wall within the range the instrument could measure. The signal went in and didn't come back because there was nothing close enough to bounce off, an opening into something beneath the trench floor. I sat in front of my screen without moving for a while. I thought about the full picture, the regular outward expansion from a center point, the clean removal of rock with no debris, 9 years of acceleration, the opening at the center that the sonar couldn't resolve. I thought about what you'd see if you watched the process from above and from the beginning. Something at the center of the excavation, working outward and upwards, removing the rock above itself in regular expanding passes, making its ceiling higher, making the space above it larger, growing its ceiling. I called Faye and told her the rest of it. I described the sonar return anomaly at the center, the partial return, the acoustic signature consistent with a void beneath the trench floor, the signal that went down and didn't come back. I described the acceleration rate across the 4 surveys, and I described the shape of the excavation when mapped at the full precision of the available data. She was quiet when I finished. Not the silence of someone who doesn't believe what they've heard. The silence of someone who's heard something that connects to something else they've been carrying. She said she needed to tell me something she'd held back in her email. She said the seismic record for the trench area over the past decade showed microseismic events occurring at the location of the excavation center, not tectonic events. The signature was different from anything tectonic, more regular and more contained, occurring at consistent depth intervals below the trench floor. She'd noted them while reviewing regional seismic data for a separate project and logged them as anomalous without knowing how to account for them. The events occurred at a rate that had been increasing over the same period as the deepening in my survey data. I asked her what she thought they were. She said she thought they were the sound of rock being removed, not fractured by pressure or torn by plate movement, removed from a specific location in a pattern that the seismic record now lined up with exactly when she mapped it against my excavation model. She said she didn't have a mechanism for that. Nothing in what she knew about deep ocean geology accounted for rock being removed at that scale and at that depth with that kind of regularity. She said she wanted to propose a 5th survey of the site with a focused ROV deployment to the excavation center. She said she thought someone needed to look at what was down there directly. I said I'd put the request to my company. I didn't tell her what I was thinking when she said that I already understood what an ROV would find at the bottom of the excavation, and I didn't want to see it directly. That knowing through the data was bad enough in its own way, but it left a distance between me and the thing itself. That seeing it directly would remove. That some things are worse once you've looked at them with something closer to eyes. I put the survey request in anyway, because the work requires it, and because I'm not someone who stops doing the work. I'm still processing sonar data. Other projects come in and I work them the way I've always worked them, carefully and precisely. The maps building up point by point from raw returns into accurate models of deep places. I'm good at this work, and it still satisfies me the way precise work satisfies a precise person. The clean resolution of complexity into something legible and true. I think about the Vila Trench most mornings before I'm fully awake, in the window before the day's structure closes in. I think about the shape of the excavation, the geometry of something working outward from a center point in regular passes, removing rock above itself, making its space larger, making its ceiling higher. I think about what it's making room for. I don't have an answer the data will support. Whatever is below the trench floor exists in a place where no instrument has ever been pointed, and where the only evidence of it is the negative space it's made above itself. The absence of rock where rock should be. The sonar signal that goes down into the dark at the center of the excavation and doesn't come back. Because whatever it enters is large enough that the bottom of it is beyond what the instrument can measure. The 5th survey is scheduled for late spring. I'll process the data when it comes in and I'll build the most precise map I can of what's there and what's not there, and how it's changed since the fourth survey. That's the work. That's what I do and what I've always done. I think about the acceleration, not in the abstract, practically, in the terms my work gives me. The rate of deepening has increased between every consecutive pair of surveys. The microseismic events Faye identified have increased in frequency over the same period. Two independent data sets, measuring two different signatures of the same process, both trending in the same direction. It's working faster than it used to. I think about why something would work faster. I map the deep places, and I've spent 16 years understanding what changes them and why. Geological processes don't accelerate without a reason. Erosion rates change when something changes the conditions of erosion. Subduction rates change when something changes the forces acting on plates. Things go faster when something is driving them faster. Whatever is below the trench floor is removing rock from above itself at an increasing rate. It's making more room than it needed before. Something changed. Something about its situation or its size or its requirements changed, and the change was in the direction of needing more space than it previously had. I don't extrapolate past what the data will support, and the data won't tell me what changed. It only tells me that something did. The fifth survey data will show me how much deeper the excavation has gotten in the time since the fourth. It'll show me whether the central opening has gotten larger, whether the sonar return from the deepest point still partially comes back, or whether the next survey's instruments will send a pulse down and get nothing at all, because the space below has grown large enough to absorb the signal entirely. I'll process that data the same way I process all of it, point by point, return by return, building a map of what's there. I'll just know when I'm looking at what the map shows, what made it. That's the thing about 16 years of this work. The pattern recognition doesn't turn off. You look at a map and you know what geological process produced it. And if no geological process produced it, you know that too. And you know what the alternative is. The alternative in this case is something that I can describe with precision from the data and can't describe at all in any other terms. Something is below the trench floor. It's been there longer than anyone has been measuring. It's been making more room for itself the whole time. And it's been getting faster at it. The maps will keep coming in. I'll keep building them. And somewhere below the deepest water on Earth, in the dark at the bottom of the excavation, something is still working. Patient and precise, and getting less patient all the time.